whenever you and I get together, Roy, we have a lot of fun looking back. So
Indeed.
let's do that for a
A
while.
lot of water under the bridge, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the first time I started seeing you when I was at San Francisco State, and you were playing with John Lee Hooker. And I think you were playing at the Last Day Saloon. Does that timing work out pretty much like maybe late 70s, early 80s?
That would have been early 80s.
Early
82 was when I
started playing with
started playing with
John?
John.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I remember the Last Day, was that like a block off Geary or something?
On Clement Street,
Yeah.
a couple of blocks off Geary Street,
And
right by the 19th.
and what I remember most about seeing you play with John Lee Hooker was all of the beautiful young girls in the audience, which is why I went.
You're a rascal. You do know that, of course.
There was something about John Lee Hooker, and he just had, the ladies liked him for some reason. I guess he had that soulful sexiness.
He was a ladies' man. John was, he certainly liked the ladies and they liked him. I think it's the energy. John Lee Hooker, of course, he had that superb, wonderful John Lee Hooker voice that could bite, but was so soothing at the same time. He could sing so softly and you could shout, but it wasn't really a shouter. John was so unique in the way he sang as well as his guitar playing. And I think, I was just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
Where was that? How did you become a top guitar player with John?
So a bass player who's actually still plays with me, Steve Ehrman, had played with John for some time, and he was playing with me at the same time because John didn't go on the road all the time. Steve would play local gigs. So anyway, I knew Steve Ehrman, and a position became open in John's band. Actually, an organ player, B3 player, and he broke his arm or something. Anyway, they were looking for a musician, and really as a rhythm guitar to take to be a rhythmic element because they had another lead guitarist in the band. So I got the call from Steve. He said, "Well, come and do a tryout with the band." At the time, I think John lived in Palo Alto and or Redwood City somewhere. Went down. Everything was all copacetic. Went on the road like a month, 2 months later. Boom, on the road. Found myself on the road with John Lee Hooker in 1982.
And that lasted what, 15 years?
No. I was only on the road with John until 86.
Okay.
And then I left to pursue my own thing. That's why 86 is when I released Chops Not Chaps, which was my first solo record. But I became some really good friends with John.
You ended up producing albums, Grammys.
I got to know John really well. I mean, he became family to us. And Gaynell and I had him up to the house. We lived in the city, and he would come up. We'd invite him up for his birthday parties. And Gaynell would, as you know, she's an incredible cook.
Your wife, of course.
Yes. And she would come up and she'd make her peach cobbler and red beans and rice. And she's a New Orleans girl. So we had some great times with John there in the city. We just became very close. Yes. Flood, Gaynell's Cookbook, which has I'll have to read the title for you folks. Down Home Cooking from a Wayward Southern Belle. I told her she had to keep that damn title. That's for sure. Anyway, it's just out, just released. And it's about, so anyway, she cooked for John and a lot of other people, of which there are stories in the book, not just recipes, but stories about all the people she's cooked for. I mean, she cooked for Big Mama Thornton. She cooked for, Taj Mahal, Bonnie Raitt, all these people, Marcellus and all that kind of stuff. So she could maybe have her on here and she could talk about that.
That's coming up next.
Okay, well, it's really a memoir cookbook. But getting back to John, that relationship led to my producing him later on. So we starting producing him in 88. We started work on the Healer. Got to work with a lot of people. The first session, first session with John was with George Thurgood. That was how we started off the Healer.
Were you the guy making the phone calls, calling George, going, "Hey, you want to sit in with them?"
No, I wasn't. His manager was really, we discussed the people to have that we thought might be, the right people to sit in, because it definitely was going to be a combination of people sitting in with John and the band. So his manager really made those calls. I was the producer in the studio, but Mike Kappas, his manager, was the guy that made those calls. Mike Kappas, Rosebud. And he was John's agent and manager.
He also did J.J. Cale. That's how I got to know.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Among many other people, the Nevilles. So anyway, that led to my producing John. I wasn't touring with the band at that time at all. And the Healer took 2 years to produce. And lo and behold, it was quite successful for John. And we were very happy. And I was just a delightful project. I mean, he won a Grammy, as you know, with Bonnie Raitt for that. We did a uh, another version of "I'm in a Mood," and we got to go to Gaynell and I got to go to the Grammys, sitting right next to Bonnie and John. I'll never forget in that afternoon segment, and they called their name and they jumped up, and neither one of them had won a Grammy up to that point. And of course, Bonnie,
The next year, I think she
she
exploded. Yeah.
won like five of or whatever year that was. But it was a thrill to be there and see them do that.
I'm going to ask you to tell a story. I know you won't. It's the one about Bob Dylan wanting to meet John Lee Hooker backstage.
Well, that was when. Just briefly, when Roy Orbison died, his wife Barbara had a benefit. I forget who the benefit was for, some organization, and it was at the Universal Amphitheater in L.A. And everybody and their brother and sister were there at the tribute, and so John Lee and Bonnie Raitt were invited because of the success of "I'm in a Mood" on the Healer record, and I played second guitar, and we just did it as a trio. We did no full band. So we're all backstage, and uh, geez, it was nobody in this room. John Lee, and I think he had a lady friend with him. Gaynell and I were there, and then you had who else was there? As I recall, Patrick Swayze, the actor, was there. He was reading a poem, and then BB King. And that's the kind of you pinch yourself when you're in these situations. But at the time, I said, "My God, what's happening here?" Well, then all of a sudden, in walks Bob Dylan, and most people don't know that Bob Dylan absolutely adored John Lee Hooker because in the early '60s, in the Greenwich Village folk scene, John played solo, and in those days, do Gertie's Folk City or all these famous clubs. Uh, in the folk circle music, 61, 62, and Dylan wasn't known at all. He became friends with John Lee Hooker. He just loved John Lee, one of his favorite, if not his favorite bluesman. So it's like old home week. And here we're all sitting in this room at this tribute, and Dylan is like, he hadn't seen John in ages, and they're just like talking fast. I mean, it's just like, wow, you remember the time? Yeah, you remember that time? All that kind of stuff. And it was, we were just observing, but we got to meet him, and John was delighted to see Bob Dylan. And you wouldn't think that. I mean, how would you know that? And so anyway, that's the short synopsis of that story.
How many Grammys did you and John get to rack up in that little period?
Well, John won a Grammys for two of the records that I produced for him. One was The Healer, and then one was for Chill Out.
Okay, Chill Out. I remember having a big poster of The Healer in my room. It was long and tall.
Yeah, well, he was holding his hand. I was there for that session. You know how he's holding his hands out like a shaman.
Oh yeah, he was a shaman.
He was a shaman, and absolutely. So that was the poster. I remember them shooting this. We were privileged to be there for the shoot in L.A. And John had a way. He was double jointed in his fingers, so he could hold his hands in ways that were completely convoluted. I mean, they were just weird looking, and that's what is the record or the poster of that shot. And he's holding his fingers out in these very strange positions. He could do weird things with his fingers in his hand. That's all I could say.
Can you think of one thing that you learned from John Lee Hooker?
What did I learn from John Lee Hooker? What I learned from John was he really enjoyed being around people. Truly, he loved people, and not just in the musical sense, but just in performing. But he truly, liked people, and he was a personable guy. I mean, he was just wonderful to be around. He had a great sense of humor. He had a laugh that if he laughed, the whole room laughed. And I think, but as far as learning, take it, I would say inspirationally, taking it as deep as you want to go. Guys like John Lee Hooker don't come around every day. And there's what's to be learned is someone who is in touch with who they are, and they know how to put out in whatever genre they're in. John's case, obviously, playing. It's not about his particular style, because nobody can play like John Lee Hooker. Certainly not sing like him. But and he knew that he'd influenced a lot of people. But that wasn't the point. The point was if he felt in any one night of taking it to a new spot or someplace, he'd do it. He didn't do it every night. He didn't feel like doing it every night. So I learned that, that's what you go for. Whatever kind of music you play, doesn't have to be blues, could be jazz, could be classical, whatever you want to do. Take it as deep as you could possibly go. That's where the blues is so wonderful because, when you see and I mean, there are nights that I was on stage with John Lee Hooker that there was just a hush over the crowd. People they were just had tears in their eyes in the front row. Not everybody could do that. And he had that power. That's a power simply from what he emanated from his music and his personality. So that's an inspiration. So it gave me inspiration to try to just reach as far as I can. I have to quote the poet Robert Browning, and I always brings to mind Robert Browning because he had this great quote that I think is applicable to all of us: is that a man's reach must always exceed his grasp. What does that mean? That means you're always going to be going for it. Whatever you got in hand, there's always something else to go for. Always. So that means it's never ending. You know.
Well, when I look at musicians and I see them age over the years and get into their latter years, I think of like Cherry Garcia, I think of this as an example. They reach a certain level where they hit a certain part of soul that's just, there's no description for it. It's just a feeling.
That's right.
And John Lee Hooker was the first person that taught me that. And then I started noticing it in other people, but John was always the origin.
Yeah, it is a feeling. It's a good way to. There's so many different ways to describe something, but you're never going to fully get it because it's a feeling. So if it's a feel, it's like being in a crowd. And I talked about with someone the other day about live music and what in a crowd can be like if you're in a collective environment. What is that? Well, I don't know. How do you describe? You have to be there to experience that. And it's not about being cool. It's not about the intellectual defining it. We try to, but you have to feel it. And that's why I think the feel of the blues, for me, that feeling is what you're always trying to get. We could talk about it. There's so many different ways to try to describe it, but it's always going to fall short. You have to feel it or you don't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that. That's the way it is.